and it took me 52 years to understand simple things. And most of them I realized when it was too late to take anything back. Listen to my story and start taking action today, because life doesn't stand still.
I hope this story helps you and shows you the right path.
This is the story of a man named Michael. He is 78 years old. He told it to me calmly, without emotion and without the desire to teach anyone anything. Simply as a description of how he lived his life. I am telling it as I heard it. His life had long seemed right to him. Not ideal, but not one that caused anxiety. He did what he thought was reasonable. He worked, built stability, avoided unnecessary risks, and did not take sudden steps. He did not live brightly, but he did not live badly either. That is why he saw no reason to change anything. He believed that life was a sequence of logical decisions. If you act carefully, do not break what already works, and do not rush, then over time everything will fall into place. He did not look for meaning, he looked for correctness. And it seemed to him that this was enough. One of the main beliefs that guided him for years was simple: first you need to fix everything, and only then live. First work. First responsibility. First stability. And life, later, when it becomes calmer and safer. He was sure that this moment would definitely come. The problem is that no one explained to him, later, has no specific date. He evaluated his life by external signs. If there were no serious problems, then everything was fine. If the day passed without conflicts, then he was moving in the right direction. He did not stop to ask himself a simple but uncomfortable question: whether he was even living the life he wanted to live. It seemed to him that such questions were either weakness or luxury. He lived with the feeling that time was on his side. That over the years he would become wiser and understand more. That many things would be solved by themselves if he simply did not do stupid things. He took his time because he believed that haste was a mistake and patience was a virtue. Now he knows that patience without awareness very easily turns into stagnation. He put off important things not because he didn't want to do them, but because they didn't seem urgent. Conversations. Changes. Rethinking. All of these things are easy to put off when life seems stable. He didn't understand that this is how the years pass, not in crises, but in comfort. If he could have changed anything about that period, he wouldn't have tried to make his life perfect. He would have learned to stop and check his direction. He would have asked himself more often not, am I living right, but, am I living at all? He would have stopped confusing the absence of problems with the presence of meaning. The biggest mistake he made was not making the wrong decisions, but making almost no real decisions. He let inertia decide for him. He let his habits determine his path. And it was convenient, because it did not require courage. But a life lived without courage always has one feature: it ends with questions that are already difficult to answer. It was then that he first felt a strange thing, as if time had become less, although outwardly nothing had changed. The days began to merge, the years to pass faster, and the feeling of moving forward gradually disappeared. And it was not about age. It was about having lived too long without noticing where he was going. And this feeling, when you realize that you have been going in the wrong direction, but for too long to simply turn around, was the beginning of something that he had not thought about all his life. He explained to me that the problem with time is that it almost never disappears abruptly. It doesn't break or give a warning. It just starts to shrink. At first, it's imperceptible. You just catch yourself thinking that the years are passing faster than before. Then you notice that your memories are getting smaller. And even later, it's getting harder and harder to answer the simple question of why you wake up in the morning. He didn't take it seriously for a long time. He thought that this was a normal state of an adult. Fatigue. Routine. Another period. He convinced himself that everyone lives like this. That life doesn't have to be interesting all the time. That the main thing is to hold on and not fall apart. And he didn't notice how he gradually began to live not his own life, but simply to play roles. He told me that one of the most dangerous mistakes is to confuse busyness with meaning. When a day is completely filled with things to do, it seems that you are moving forward. In fact, you could just be running in circles. He was very busy. But when he honestly asked himself what exactly was changing from all this effort, he couldn't find the answer. He avoided stopping. Because stopping means thinking. And thinking means risking seeing something you don't want to see. It was easier for him to stick to a familiar rhythm than to ask questions that don't have ready-made answers. This is how, according to him, people live in a life of procrastination for years without even realizing it. He specifically emphasized something he realized too late. If you constantly tell yourself, now is not the time, sooner or later time ceases to be an argument. It simply runs out. And then it doesn't matter how much you worked, how much you endured, and how right your intentions were. Over time, he began to notice that the things that once mattered no longer evoke emotions. Achievements don't delight. Plans don't inspire. Even rest doesn't restore. He told me that it didn't look like depression and didn't look like a crisis. This was the state of a person who had ignored himself for too long. He said it very directly in this place. If you live in such a way that you don't want to look at your life from the outside, that's a signal. If you are afraid of silence without doing anything, that's a signal. If you put off the question, "Am I okay?" for years, that's not patience. That's running away. If he could advise himself at that moment, it wouldn't be, "Change everything." It would be one simple thing: start honestly recording what it is that you are avoiding. Don't justify it with logic, circumstances, or responsibility. Because what you are running away from is what affects your life the most. He also said that most people think that the biggest problems come from the outside. In fact, they appear when you don't look inside for a very long time. And the longer you don't do this, the more painful the moment becomes when it is no longer possible to avoid it. At that time, he didn't know what this would lead to. He still believed that everything could be fixed without major changes. But the feeling that something was wrong didn't go away. It was just waiting for the moment when it would no longer be possible to ignore it. He told me that relationships almost never fall apart overnight. That was one of the things he realized too late. They don't disappear because of one argument or one wrong word. They wear away. Slowly. Quietly. So that over time you can't pinpoint the exact moment when things went wrong. For a long time, he had believed that if there was no open conflict, then everything was fine. If no one complained, then everyone was happy. If there was peace around, then there were no problems. It was a convenient explanation because it didn't require him to change anything. He later realized that peace very often meant fatigue. And silence meant rejection. He was around people, but he wasn't always in the same space with them. He listened, but he didn't always hear. He responded, but he rarely showed interest. He felt that his presence was obvious, that his intentions were understood without words. He did not notice how contact gradually disappeared and only roles remained. He spoke separately about one common mistake. Many people believe that loved ones already know that they are valued. But they do not know. They only feel what is really happening. And if there is less conversation, less sincerity, and less time without distractions between people, the distance is felt, even if you call it stability. He often chose silence instead of conversation, because he did not want to complicate things. It seemed to him that compromises were a sign of maturity. Later, he realized that compromise without dialogue is just a postponed conflict. It does not disappear anywhere. It accumulates. There is one more thing that he asked to pay attention to. If a person stops sharing his thoughts, if it is easier for him to remain silent than to explain, if he avoids conversations that could change something, this is not peace. This is the beginning of alienation. He had long believed that responsibility meant taking on more and not complaining. But over time, he realized that responsibility in a relationship is being able to be vulnerable. It means talking about what is uncomfortable. It means admitting that you are not always right. He could not do that. And when he did, it turned out that there was much less time left than he thought. He told me another thing that is difficult to accept. Relationships rarely end because of a lack of love. They end because of a lack of presence. And when that happens, it feels very unpleasant. You were there, but you were not there. If he could give any advice to someone who recognizes himself in these words, he would say simply, if you put off conversations that really matter, you are already making a choice. You just don't admit it. And that choice almost always works against you. He admitted that for a long time he believed that everything could be fixed with a little effort. That it is enough to wait a little, tighten up other areas of life a little, and the tension will disappear by itself. But there are moments when the tension does not disappear. It simply turns into losses. And it was then, according to him, that he first truly felt that some things in life do not return, even if you sincerely want to fix everything. He told me that the hardest moment in life is not the loss itself. The hardest moment is realizing that it was predictable. That everything that happened was not an accident. It was the result of decisions he had made over the years, even if he didn't call them decisions. When illusions begin to crumble, they don't disappear abruptly. They crack. Slowly. And with each crack, it becomes harder to pretend that nothing is happening. He had long held on to the idea that he could still hold on. That it wasn't too late. That with a little effort, life would return to normal. But, as he said, there comes a point when it's hard to accept. Some things don't break suddenly. They just stop holding on. He began to lose what he had taken for granted. Not because he had stopped appreciating them, but because he had taken them for granted for too long. Relationships, trust, a sense of home, all of that was gone without noise, without explanation, without conflict. Just with silence. And it was this silence that was the hardest. Because there was no one to argue with. No one to blame. There was only you and your own decisions. He said something in private that many people don't want to hear. Stability doesn't protect against loss. It often masks it. It creates a feeling that everything is under control, even when control is long gone. He lived with that feeling for a long time. And when it disappeared, there was a question that he wasn't ready to answer: what to do next? Gradually, he began to realize the cost of his choices. Not in one day. At first, it was a feeling of emptiness. Then confusion. Then fear. Not the kind of fear that paralyzes, but the kind that makes you look at your life without excuses. And at that moment, it's very easy to make another mistake, to start looking for someone to blame. He could blame circumstances, time, other people. But the truth was different. He had ignored the signals for too long. He hadn't listened because it was convenient for him not to listen. He hadn't changed because he was sure he was right. And now he had to pay for that certainty. He told me another thing that sounds simple but is hard to accept. If you think now that this won't happen to you, he thought the same way. Almost everyone thinks that way. That's why these stories repeat themselves. That's why people start to think when the choice has already been made. One of the most important things he realized during this period was that losses don't always mean the end. But they always mean change. And the question is not whether this change will happen, but whether you are ready to accept it, whether you will try to return what can no longer be the same as before. He admitted that he didn't know yet what to do next. He had no ready answers. But he already knew one thing for sure: living the way you used to be wouldn't work anymore. And that realization was the point at which it was impossible to ignore reality. And then a question arose that he had never asked himself. If the past could not be undone, what could he do with this life now? After the illusions disappear, there remains a very simple, yet complex question: what to do with this life from now on? Not with the past, it has already happened. But with what remains. He told me that this is where many people get stuck. They either try to return what is no longer there, or convince themselves that nothing terrible has happened. He chose a different path. Not because it was easier, but because everyone else was no longer working. He began with an unpleasant realization: most of his problems were connected not with circumstances, but with the way of thinking. With beliefs that he had believed for years to be correct. With ideas about what life, a person, success and responsibility should be. He lived by rules whose truth he had never tested. Simply because they seemed logical and safe. The first thing he understood concerned time. Time is not a resource that can be accumulated or replenished. It only works when you are aware of what you are spending it on. If you don't set your priorities for yourself, inertia does it for you. And inertia almost always leads you to the wrong place. The second was about relationships. He said that they are not built on intentions or the right words. They are built on presence. Not on grand gestures, but on regular attention. If you constantly put off intimacy for later, one day you find that there is no way back. And that is not a tragedy. It is a consequence. Cold, logical, and very painful. The third was about success. He saw people who had achieved a lot, but had lost touch with themselves and with those around them. Success can give comfort and a sense of control, but it does not give meaning. If you build your life only around results, at some point you find that there is simply nothing to hold on to. The fourth was about avoidance. He said that avoiding problems is always more expensive than solving them. What you don't want to see now, you will be forced to see later, but without the possibility of choosing. If there is a conversation that you have been avoiding for years, it will not disappear. It will simply change form and price. He did not become a different person in one day. He did not fix his life. Many things remained broken. But he stopped living under the illusion that everything would somehow get better. He began to do simple but difficult things. To listen when he did not feel like it. To speak when it was more convenient to remain silent. To stop where inertia dragged on. And most importantly, he stopped thinking that he had an infinite supply of time. After that, he paused. Not for effect. Simply because some thoughts are not uttered immediately. It was clear that he had not finished yet. That there were things that he approached very carefully. And it was then that it became clear, what he would say next would be more important than all the explanations before this.
I realized it too late, but it's not too late to stop wasting your life. If any of this sounded familiar, you still have what I didn't: time.